The very same people who say that government has no right to interfere with sexual activity between consenting adults believe the government has every right to interfere with the economic activity between consenting adults. Welcome to Keith Knight Don't Tread on Anyone and the Libertarian Institute. Today I'm joined by Olivia Rondeau. Olivia, where is the best place for people to find your work?
On Twitter, I am at Rondeau Olivia, and on Instagram, I am Rondeau.Olivia. And my link tree is in my bios on both platforms. It'll take you to all my articles at Feed, Timcast, Daily Caller, etc.
Awesome. Yes, she is the Hazlitt Fellow at the Foundation for Economic Education. Great place. I've learned so much from them. Today, I wanted to talk about some of your influences and some of the books that you and I actually share as far as being our inspirations. What was your biggest takeaway from reading Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell?
The reason I really liked it was because it really broke it down simply. I think it's a great book to give to anyone to read who is not familiar with free market economics or libertarianism, or just wants to start learning about economics in general. Because my favorite part is how it just broke it down simply and be like, okay, this is why people sometimes gravitate towards socialism, and this is why people would benefit greatly from the free market. And I guess Sowell does a good job of emphasizing the morality, I think, behind the free market over, the redistribution of wealth, because to me, I've always found that pretty immoral. Like, I was never like a communist or anything, but I think he explains it in a way that makes it easier for like normies to understand, because I tend to listen to books instead of reading them. And I was listening to it around my mom, and she overheard it and was like, okay, like that makes sense. And she's not a very political person. Like she's not a socialist or like a hardcore Democrat. She's just not political. She just doesn't get it. And so that's why I really liked it. And so I always recommend Thomas Sowell. I've also read, I think the other book was called Black Rednecks and White Liberals. That's not my favorite. I think it's great, but for beginners, I really, really recommend Basic Economics.
Why do you think people are still attracted to socialism when you've had experiments like North Korea and South Korea, East Germany and West Germany, Venezuela and
Because that
Chile?
wasn't real socialism. That wasn't real communism. That's literally why. That's literally all it is. There's so much misinformation about it. And I always talk about this pretty frequently. But the reason why I think that people in my generation, like Gen Z, we tend to hate capitalism so much is because we think that we're currently living in a capitalistic society. We think that the government giving bailouts to Jeff Bezos and huge farm bailouts and Federal Reserve and bank bailouts, that's what capitalism is. But that's not what it is at all. But I think we have a strong misconception about what the free market is. So I sometimes try to even not use the word capitalism as much as I use the word free market, just because of the connotation.
It's amazing that in 1776, Adam Smith was writing about how mercantilism is the state and the business owners merging together and conspiring, he uses that word, against the public and the customers. And today, people are calling that the free market when it was founded in opposition to those very things. As far as Thomas Sowell's explanation for why people are so attracted to it, do you have any other ideas as to why people are attracted to this concept of, tax the rich, shocks everyone, photos everywhere? What do you think? Do you have any ideas to the psychology behind this?
Well, people want to feel safe. And I've spoken a little bit about this before. And I am not a super religious person at all, but I do see the merit in having something higher than yourself that you believe in, whether that's something inner or something outside of yourself. I do believe that it's important to, find your purpose and believe in a purpose in life. And I think that without that, people tend to flock to the government or the state or some type of authority to be that purpose or to tell them what to do. And so I think that people generally look at the government or the state as this kind of like this otherworldly being that isn't made up of real flawed people with real flawed ideologies who make real mistakes and who are really not adequately equipped to protect you or to serve you. And so people just have way too much faith in the government, and people think that, oh, tax the rich or just give us a UBI or just give us a stimulus check. They really think it's that simple because they don't view the government as a group of flawed people, which we all are.
I love how Sowell starts the book right on page 1 where he defines economics. This way people don't think it's like the study of the Dow Jones. He says, economics is the study of the use of scarce resources which have alternative uses. I think one of the great attractions of socialism is they completely ignore this reality. So things should just be free and everyone should just have them. Well, they don't grasp opportunity costs, that for every resource you spend in one direction, you can't spend it in another. All of the Democrats on the debate stage, I think there were like 10 of them, when they were asked, should this universal health care plan be limited to just citizens or also undocumented people as well? And they all raised their hand. So in other words, 7 billion people, planet Earth, could be on their health plan that's paid for with other people's money. How do you?
I don't think they really believe that. I genuinely don't think they're not that stupid. They're evil, but they're not that stupid. But people are that stupid, and we're looking at them like, and yeah, wow, undocumented immigrants, like healthcare is a human right. I agree that everybody should have the opportunity to get healthcare, but that's really all you're entitled to. And I read or I listened to Basic Economics right around the time I was taking a macroeconomics class in college. And I realized everything that was in the book was basically what I was learning about anyways. And I actually had a pretty decent macroeconomics professor. He was not really biased. He wasn't saying, oh, capitalism is the only way, but what we had learned about scarcity and the definition of economics was basically the exact same way that Stowe had defined it throughout the book. And it blew my mind, because even at the end of that semester, we took like a poll essentially, and in the classroom discussion, people were still in favor of universal basic income, universal health care, or like a free higher education. And I was like, do you guys not learn anything? Like, not even a little bit. And so that's when I realized that the indoctrination is like way worse than I thought, because people act like, oh, people are going to these Marxist universities and getting indoctrinated there, which to some regard is true. But these kids, when they came in, they already believed that, and going through a whole semester of basically a pro-free market macroeconomics class didn't really do anything to change that.
Yeah, Thomas Sowell tells the story, I forget where, but he said in 1959, he saw, this idea of universal healthcare sort of in action in America. So, that they pretend there's a terrible predatory free market, and then there's the government stuff, which is just free and always there. He actually watched a guy die outside of the U.S. Public Health Services. There were a bunch of doctors inside, and because there was such a bureaucracy unable to attend to people. This happened in Arizona like 5 years ago at the VA in Phoenix. Wow. That people are actually dying because there's such a shortage. It's the equivalent. I mean, the left is always saying the police are terrible and they don't provide justice. It's like, well, that's free universal policing for everyone. Yeah, you don't get to choose the quality. You don't get to choose the quality.
Listen, I say the same thing to conservatives too, because then they don't really understand it. Because I'm like, why should the government have a monopoly on violence? Why should the government have a monopoly on a certain type of weapon or a certain type of gun? And then you can see the cognitive dissonance in their brains kind of like cause a malfunction as well.
Sowell has a great book called The Vision of the Anointed, and he said there's 4 key elements. This was written like 25 years ago. He says there's about 4 key elements you have to watch out for, and if you ever see these in play, just know that a swindle is going on. He says, step 1, assertions of a great danger to the whole of society, a danger to which the masses of people are oblivious. Step 2, an urgent need for action to avert impending catastrophe. 3, a need for government to drastically curtail the dangerous behavior of the many in response to the present conclusions of the few. 4, a disdainful dismissal of arguments to the contrary as either uninformed, irresponsible, or motivated by unworthy purposes. He writes about the COVID and climate change pandemic decades before they actually came to fruition. Do you have any response to that? I just love that passage.
It's honestly, I don't think I've actually heard that exact passage before. But it's kind of amazing how he like predicted that. I think I've read like a lot of, I've more recently been into Sowell, but I've read some more Spooner recently, and he has become like my new favorite. And I feel like he had a lot of predictions as well. in regards to just trusting the government way too much. And this is the end result. And now we're here. And it's really disheartening to see. And I think that more people who, I mean, honestly, especially my age, but really anyone needs to look back at what the great, speakers and philosophers and authors were saying about this, because history repeats itself, and it already is. And it's really disheartening to see. Like, I don't know if I'm too young to be black-pilled, but I definitely am right now. Like, I definitely am. And like, there's a lot of like boomers who are like, oh, your generation's going to save it. Your generation is better than millennials. We're not. Like, not even a little bit. We're horrible. We're like completely like Marxist. We're not liberals. Like, we're like, my generation are like leftists. It's worse. And so I just wish, this is why Basic Economics is one of my favorite books, is because I think people who are stupid need to read it, because it's really not a hard book to read at all.
So yeah, the soul is great as far as economics goes. Let's get into Spooner a little. What are some of your big takeaways from Spooner's work?
So recently, I was on a podcast with Carrie Wedler. She's a pretty good anarchist libertarian YouTuber. I had her on my show, and she introduced me to some works of Spooner. And I had studied it a little bit with Fee. I think for one article I might have cited like a quote from Spooner, but it really opened my eyes to the fallacy of constitutionalism, because I've always, since I was like more conservative or libertarian within like the last 3 or 4 years, I've always been like, oh yeah, I'm a constitutionalist. I like the Constitution. The Constitution protects our rights. And then reading Spooner made me realize that it doesn't, like, at all, like not even a little bit. It should, I still think it's a good document. I'm not trashing the Constitution, but I'm trashing the power that people think it has, because it really doesn't have much. I mean, since this country's inception, the government has walked all over the Constitution. So reading Spooner, I don't know if I'm ever going to become like an anarcho-capitalist or an anarchist or something, but it definitely put me into that direction, because I think one of his main philosophies was just that the Constitution basically either can't protect our rights, or it created this government that can't. And I'm a little bit disenchanted with it lately. But that's not to say that I hate it. I wish it was more powerful, but it's just not.
It's difficult when you have people trying to abide by a document, and if they do a really bad job, you can't opt out of funding them. I mean, imagine if like restaurants got your money, whether they brought the food to the table or they didn't. That's going to attract the most evil people to work at the restaurant over time, and you're never going to get the food, and they're always going to want more money. So,
but the sign on the door says you're going to get your food, so you're like, oh my God, the sign on the door says I'm going to get my food. Oh my God. And you can scream about that all you want, but if the sign on the door isn't holding these people accountable, then it's kind of a useless sign. So I like the rule on the sign of the door. I really enjoy all the amendments. I enjoy the First Amendment. I enjoy the Second Amendment. It's great. It was written by geniuses. I'm so grateful that they wrote that, because we have a basis for a large part of our ideology as people who lean more conservative or libertarian or even anarchist. But what does it actually do? Not much. And I know, like, that the Supreme Court, things are decided based off the Constitution, but not nearly as many things, not as many things as there should be. I mean, I feel like there's so many unconstitutional laws these days, and nobody really talks about it until it comes to like Roe v. Wade or whatever. It comes to the hot button issues, but so many little things that are just kind of fly under the radar really piss me off.
What was your biggest takeaway from Animal Farm by George Orwell?
I love that book. I actually read that in high school, so that was maybe like 6 years ago when I first read it. And I feel like that's what made me like not a liberal anymore, because in my early teen years, I was definitely leaning more that way. I didn't really know what was going on. I didn't read any political theory. That was my first Orwell book I've ever read. Since then, I read like 1984, which I enjoyed too, but Animal Farm will always be my favorite, because again, it's one of those books that I was in high school. So it's one of those books that a high schooler can understand the metaphor of being on a farm, and it relating to communism, and it relating to state control, and relating to basically the people in charge who are kind of making this plan that seems so great. They're the ones that are, making bank, and you're just kind of a pig on a farm, and that's just all it is. So that's probably why it's one of my favorite books, because again, easy to understand, because I don't like reading, and it kind of opened my eyes. So it's like a lot of nostalgia related to that.
Yeah, it was definitely one of the books that I read, and I started thinking about actual equality, that it's probably not even desirable for everyone to, not have a role in the division of labor and then to excel in their respective fields. It's like all the things I love in life are not the result of everyone voting and there being equal influence. It's like only a few people influence the greatest, TV shows, the architecture I like, the computers I use. Um, and then the second thing was just the concept of equality in principle, that the people advocating 535 people rule over 300 million strangers. Well, that's the least equal thing you could think of. Or the G7, like the most powerful people on earth, they're like, we need to build back better. And this is going to include equality. Government steals 5 trillion every year. Does anyone else come close to that? I mean, the biggest mobsters on the planet don't come close, and they're talking about equality. They make executive orders. We have to obey them. That's equal to them. What a scam.
It's totally BS. I think that the G7, honestly, this relates to any of these like global groups. I feel the same way about the UN and NATO and everything. It's just like, I didn't vote for you people, and you guys are making rules for me, and you guys are stealing from me. And I don't really like that. And I feel like it's very simple to understand if you think critically about it for a little bit. So when I talk to people my age, I always bring that up, and I'm like, when you were born, did you like sign this supposed social contract, to let the government just take your stuff whenever they feel like it at gunpoint? They're like, well, no, but my roads, my police, who will build my roads? And then we start talking about it. But I always start off with something like that. I've cited Animal Farm a couple of different times, especially to kids who I went to high school with, because I'm like, I know you remember reading that. Like, I know you remember reading that like freshman year of high school. I know you know what it's about. So apply it to real life, because it is that simple, I think.
What were your biggest takeaways from The Invisible Thread by Yashiko Ookans?
So that is my favorite book of all time, actually. It's a firsthand account of Japanese internment during World War II. And there's not a lot of literature on that. It was about a girl who, it's autobiography of a girl who I think was maybe in high school during World War II, and her family from California was all uprooted and sent to, I think, Topaz, which was in Utah. So basically everyone on the West Coast got shoved into like the desert, so they're not even in their home state anymore. She was a second generation Japanese immigrant. Had like literally zero ties to any type of spy thing. I think later on they found out that the only spies for Japan they found were like white Americans. Like they weren't even like Japanese immigrants at all. So it was just like really crazy. But when you're researching things like Japanese internment, I feel like history is pretty whitewashed. I don't mean that in like a racially way, but just like in a way that's like, they make it sound a lot nicer than it really was. So she talked about living in horse barracks because she was staying on a repurposed like horse racetrack, and everything was just like nasty and gross. And it really, at a young age, it opened my eyes to like the horrible things our country has done, based on people's nationality or race.
Yeah, definitely getting those firsthand account sort of like makes it real. Like if you're to hear about 120,000 were kidnapped and interned, or, King Leopold killed, 1 million people in the Congo. It's
Right.
really
That's
hard.
another one that I never learned about in school. I really had to research that by myself.
It's like it's really hard to make that real in your head, killed 1 million people. But when you see, the cops killing Kelly Thomas or Eric Garner, it's like, wow, that really is a show of state power. So it actually gives credence to the 1 death is a tragedy, 1 million deaths is a statistic. That's why I think it's so important to read books like that. I had never heard of this. This is definitely something I want to look into. But yeah, looking into the crimes of the state and, really any person who believes in who doesn't recognize the self-ownership principle, it's so important because it makes their aggression real, and it's so much more motivating than statistics or anything like that. Any final words on that book?
I just highly recommend that anyone read it because it's very interesting. It's not like a boring like historical. It is nonfiction, but it starts off when she's a child. It really humanizes the event because it starts off like, just growing up in a normal American family, facing a little bit of, ignorance here and there, but not full-blown racism until World War II came around, until the government rounded everybody up, treated them like cattle, gave each family a serial number, stuff like that. I mean, it makes me think about the Holocaust, how each person was given a number and just taken away from their family and shoved into these barracks. It made me feel horrible to read it because it starts off as an innocent young girl, and by the end of the book, she's like this hardened woman who had to get like a special work release to even get off of the base where she was at to go be a teacher. And it was just like, I don't know, it's always really haunted me. So anyone who's interested in learning about Japanese internment or just the culture around World War II, I would highly recommend it. And again, it's pretty easy read. It's a pretty short book.
What was the biggest takeaway for you by Boy by Rondeau?
So Roald Dahl is one of my favorite authors ever since I was a kid. So again, there's a lot of like nostalgia with that. And I also really like autobiographies, so it's also autobiography. And it just talks about him growing up in Europe, mostly Norway. And I just really like it. It's not political at all, so I don't know if it's like relevant to this podcast at all, but it's just like one of my favorite all-time books because I really liked all the other stuff he was written. So I just like reading about authors and stuff, so yeah.
I'm not sure why I invented an N in the middle of his name, Roald Dahl.
I was like, you gotta know who Roald Dahl is, right?
I've heard it, but when I wrote this down, I haven't. I put an N right there. So what is the plot of the book?
It just kind of goes into, again, it starts from when he's a kid, talks about like a lot of deaths in his family, getting sick as a kid, moving around schools a lot because I believe it was his father who died pretty young, and so he moved from Norway to England and just like hardships going through that, and talked about how he decided to start writing and publishing children's books. And I like all his books. I've probably read like every single Roald Dahl book. So yeah, it's just I feel like it's not that interesting unless you're like a big Roald Dahl fan because it's just like his life and stuff, but I really like it.
What was the biggest takeaway from Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe?
That's another book I read in school. I think it might have been my freshman year of college as well. But I really liked it because my biggest takeaway is actually kind of funny because I had always been called like an Uncle Tom and stuff in high school when I was like more conservative, and people would be like, oh, you're an Uncle Tom. And I was like, what does that mean? So I read the book, and Uncle Tom's not even a bad character in the book. He's like not, I don't understand why there's such an evil connotation to it. And so my biggest takeaway was that it was kind of a compliment to be called Uncle Tom because it was clearly people who didn't read the book and clearly people who didn't understand the lesson of the book. Uncle Tom was a Black slave at the time who ended up dying in a pretty, I believe he died at the end of the book, but it was like, it wasn't like, the connotation is like Uncle Tom is like a sellout, like a race trader, and the book completely just like kind of dispelled that myth, and it was just like really weird because he was actually a pretty brave character in the book.
I want to get into some of your influences. What do you think is a great contribution that Thomas Massie has made to the freedom movement?
He's just awesome. He's my favorite congressman. There really is no one I think that even comes close to him. In terms of U.S. representatives. I like his personality. I like that he lives off the grid on a ranch with like solar panels and stuff and is just completely like not relying on the government. That is honestly my dream. I dream about having a ranch with solar panels, honestly. I like his social media. He posts really funny stuff and in an educational way. Like he makes libertarianism seem kind of fun to me in a way. So yeah, I think he's just an inspiration. And I think he is proof that there can be liberty Republicans, because I'm not even a Republican, but I've worked on Republican races. And people will criticize me and be like, well, there's no true libertarians in the GOP. It's impossible for a libertarian to get in the GOP. Well, Thomas Massey's proof of that. So I feel really inspired by it.
Oh, yeah. Whenever we would do events with Turning Point USA or Young Republicans at Arizona State or Grand Canyon University, there were so many allies there. And a lot of them were even ANCAPs who were like, you know what, this is just a big group that I could help influence, and we have a lot in common. And
Yeah.
also, it's nice to make friends along the way.
I think it's
So,
important to build the bench in the Republican Party and the LP and wherever you can. I don't think we have to put all our eggs in one basket. I think we can definitely build coalitions in the Republican Party.
exactly. And I'm thankful that people, took the time to speak to me when I was a Democrat, when I was first getting into politics,
Oh
because
no.
I never would have been, introduced to the ideas in the first place. Um, what was something you learned from Scott Horton?
So I've been a fan of Scott Horn this past year, and I just ordered his book. I haven't got it yet. I just ordered his book, Enough Already, about ending the wars and stuff, and I really wanted to read it. But I've been following social media for a while, but then I really consider myself a true fan when I saw him speak in person in Orlando at the Young Americans for Liberty Revolution conference, which was about a month ago. And it blew my mind because I already knew I was anti-war at that point. I already knew I was not for the military-industrial complex. I already knew a lot of the stuff that he was talking about. But again, he broke it down in a way for me that just really blew my mind. And I didn't know about the sheer numbers of war crimes and the sheer numbers of civilian deaths and things that, when you get really specific, make the issue seem even worse. And it is that bad. And so when he was getting up there, just spouting off statistics and spouting off facts about just how much money the military-industrial complex wastes, how many people are killed, civilians are killed each year by the military-industrial complex, how many veterans' lives are ruined too because we provide them basically no aftercare for whatever. I mean, we'd already talked about the VA and how horrible that is, but in terms of mental health as well, we just let them be homeless and commit suicide and ruin their lives. And it's just the way he talked about it made me really angry. And I don't get angry in politics that often because I feel like it's bad to have visceral reactions to things. Just, I guess it's facts over feelings. When I heard those facts, I became very emotional sitting in the audience. And then I actually ran into him kind of on 9/11 because he was at the End the Damn Wars rally in DC. I don't know who was going to be there. So I show up there and I see Scott Horn. I was totally starstruck. I was like, oh man, I'm not going to go up to this guy. He doesn't know who I am. I don't want to bother him. And I heard from other people that he's not I don't think he's a grumpy guy, but I heard from people that he's kind of intimidating to talk to. So I was like, oh man, I really don't want to bother this guy. So I just let him, I'm sitting in the audience, recording his speech because I really wanted to save it for later. Because again, he did a really great job. And then the day after I get home, he DM'd me on Twitter. He was like, hey, I'm starting to get a chance to talk to you. And I was like, you know who I am? Oh, I feel so stupid now for not talking to him. But yeah, he's influenced me a lot and made me a lot more passionate about ending the wars, to be honest.
Yeah, so I want to get into what it was that sort of motivated you to really be against this, against the, war machine is such a straw man term, against the general foreign policy that the U.S. has had since, I don't know, Woodrow Wilson or probably the Spanish-American War. So you mentioned the statistics of U.S. The statistics of the civilians killed in the overseas adventures. What else was it?
This is kind of funny, but back when I was in high school / freshman in college, I would date military guys for some reason, and then they would all say shit. Sorry, I didn't mean to say. I didn't mean to cuss in here. Sorry. They would all. I don't know if I can cuss, but they would all say stuff like, "Oh, I just can't wait to just get over there and shoot people and pick up a gun." I'd be like, that's kind of weird. I don't know why you would want to do that. And this one guy, he was really obsessed with being on the front lines and picking up a gun and shooting people. And I was like, I don't know. I really don't like that sentiment. We ended up breaking up. And, and then I really took a hard look at it. I was like, why is the military recruiting these kids and telling them they can go over there and kill people? And it's acting like they're taking their frustration out just by going over there and killing people. I was like, damn, we are definitely recruiting the wrong types of people and for the wrong reasons. And that really motivated me to really look into it deeper. And I think it's something 90% of drone strike deaths are civilian deaths. It's something crazy like that. And once I knew that, I was like, yeah, I cannot support this. And at the time I was not a Republican. I was still independent, but I was definitely more leaning to that side. And then I couldn't deal with the warmongers. I just couldn't deal with the people. I criticize Dan Crenshaw pretty frequently because he's a pretty big warmonger. And he's a veteran, so I do value his opinion more than like Ben Shapiro, who wants to send kids to die over there and has never served himself. But still, when Dan Crenshaw was talking about how we should never have pulled out of Afghanistan because they're going to make another 9/11 or women are not going to have rights, I'm just like, 90% of drone strike deaths are civilian. We left billions of dollars of equipment there. We basically armed the Taliban, and that's not really the fault of people who wanted to pull out. That's the fault of the people who botched the pullout. I really think, and this is my conspiracy brain talking, but I really feel like they purposely botched the pullout so bad that we would have to go back. I really believe that.
Yeah,
so
there's actually,
it's kind of funny how it stemmed from me like not liking this guy I was dating for saying like crazy stuff about killing people in the Middle East, and then it led me to look deeper into it and be like completely against the military industrial complex. But like I said, I didn't really get emotional about it until I heard Scott Horton talk about it, because he just talked about so much death and so many war crimes, and I was just like, it's one of those things that you just don't want to believe that your country that you love is capable of doing, you know?
definitely. Yeah, there's something, I think it's called the Washington Monument Strategy. So, like, whenever governments want to, really secure their funding, they do something to really hurt the public in order to get the public to sympathize with funding them more. The biggest example was what they tried to do in Waco, which was fake save a bunch of kids from what they were calling an abusive religious cult.
Yeah, cults, right?
Little did they know that they would actually be met with a little resistance. And the reason it's the Washington Monument is because when they wanted to cut like 1% of the billions of dollars of parks budgets, that most of which is, wasted, of course, the first thing they do is they shut down access to the Washington Monument. This way, people who traveled all over to go to Washington, D.C. to see the monument, when they were like, oh, well, this is what happens when you want to cut funding, so we really need to support funding. They want to make it the most visible thing they can. This way people are sympathetic. So when, lack of military intervention leads to ISIS, who they explicitly armed in Operation Timber Sycamore in Syria and Libya and sided with them in Yemen, of course, when the Taliban gets a bunch of guns and weapons, it's like, well, too bad. A terrible thing happened, and long story short, we need more power. Yeah, I'm shocked. I'm shocked.
They literally left like dozens of military dogs in cages to let the Taliban like do whatever they want to them, and be like, oh my God, the Taliban stole our dogs. This is crazy. We have to go back. Like, y'all left it there. Y'all literally left them there. You botched it. You completely botched it. I think we're gonna be back within the next 5 years. To be honest, it's gonna be horrible.
One of the big reasons that guys want to go into the military is definitely because, it gets the attention of a lot of good-looking women. If you watch a lot of the, soldier returns home in a surprise thing, the women tend to be very gorgeous. What do you think about, why do you think it is that women tend to be attracted to the sort of the soldier or policeman?
For me, so I think I did like 2 military guys like back to back, but I wouldn't say it was because they're military. It just so happened that like in high school and like college, I like exclusively dated wrestlers because I was on the wrestling team. And a lot of wrestlers end up going in the military just because it's a very physically demanding sport. And a lot of them are very conservative. I think a lot of wrestlers, at least in my area, a lot of them were like Republican or conservative just because my theory about it is that wrestling takes a lot of hard work, so people have to really like pull yourself up by the bootstraps, like very that type of authoritarian mentality or whatever, which is like, I'm not judging that. I have kind of a pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality as well, like personally. So that's why I kind of started dating these military guys. But for other people, I mean, there's a lot of benefits. I don't know if you've heard like the meme like Dependa, which is like a military wife who just wants to depend on like the TRICARE, the benefits, the house that the officers get to live in, all that kind of stuff. Want to live on base, want that 15% military discount. When I worked at a restaurant my freshman year of high school or my freshman year of college, we had a 15% military discount like most restaurants do. We had a lot of military wives come in and try to use that discount, but that's not how it works. It's for veterans or active duty, people in the reserves, like people who actually serve. And so I'm not saying that all military wives are like that, but I would say the reason that they get married so young stereotypically is because they like the benefits,
Well, I mean, it's definitely tempting. Is there anything unattractive about a guy who signs up for a position and promises to take orders from like the most evil people on earth? Does that ever enter into the equation?
Yeah, so that uh so, so the last military guy that guy did, he's actually a really great guy, really good guy, but I wasn't like super on board with like the government owning him. And I was just like, that's kind of, and he would say a lot of statist stuff like, I just want, Uncle Sam like owns my ass now. I just want to go over there and like protect this country and shoot and kill people that are a threat to this country. I want to fight for freedom. I was like, for freedom? Like, how are you fighting for freedom? I was genuinely confused. And he couldn't really explain it to me. And he just wrote me off as being like a dumb libertarian. And this is before I even identified as a libertarian or anything like that. I was still didn't really know what that was. So I was still like a conservative, but I was questioning the government. And it didn't make me more attracted to him. I was just like, I don't know. Like I appreciate guys who are like really individualistic, not necessarily a part of like a hive mind, especially when that hive mind is in the government. So I don't fault anyone for being a veteran. I appreciate veterans. I want veterans to be treated better, the whole 9 yards. But there's a certain mentality that some people have when they want to start to, fight in the military that I just really not attracted to. I feel like I find it very statist, honestly.
Did you ever talk to a military member that mentioned blowback, that the reason, bin Laden and Zawahiri are able to recruit people is because of supporting Israel, occupying Saudi Arabia, and Iraqi sanctions in the 90s? Did that ever come up or cross their mind?
I don't think I had a conversation that deep with anyone in the military, to be honest. I don't think so. I don't recall.
All right. I'm sorry if that going deep on that was was annoying. I was just curious.
No. It's cool. It's cool. I just think it's funny how the journey of me like realizing the evils of the military industrial complex was like dating a military guy who like really, really liked it. And I was like, I don't really mess with that. So yeah.
What are some major things you learned from the work of Spike Cohen?
I love Spike. Spike is like my favorite person to hear speak. I watched like a ton of his podcasts and stuff. He was on my podcast like several months ago. Then I met him in person in Miami like 2 weeks ago. I was at Maj Touré's Solutionary Summit. I was on a panel as a speaker. And I DM'd Spike. I was like, are you trying to pull up to this? Because I saw you're in Miami on the same weekend. It was like Labor Day weekend, I think. And he was like, yeah, I'll bring my wife, Tasha. And I was like, okay, cool. So he actually pulled up. I didn't really expect him to. And we're like best friends now. And we were just talking about like libertarian stuff. He was mostly making like a bunch of like dumb dad jokes. Now there's a running joke that I'm his daughter because honestly, if I stand next to any like interracial couple, I just look like their kids. So I was standing next to Tasha and Spike at the Solutionary Summit, and they left because I had to go to a different event. And someone comes up to me and is like, "Are those your parents, Olivia?" And I was like, "Yes, those are my parents." And so the next night, I get dinner with him at this pro like Freedom for Cuba event, which was also ran by some libertarians down in Miami. And I ended up taking a selfie with him and his wife, and I just posted it on Twitter with the caption, "Oh my God, my parents came to see me at the Solutionary Summit," and he quote tweeted it saying that, "Oh, we would do anything for you," like #family. And not everybody thinks that Spike Cohen is my dad. So he's less of an influence now and more of a father figure, so to speak. So
That's a great segue to go from stranger to friend to father figure.
I really do look
game.
like his kid though. Like with Tasha and him, it's so believable. It looks so real. It's so funny.
As far as if you had to pick, one person to run in the LP for president, not because, we're going to win sometime soon, for the sake of using it as a platform to communicate the idea of freedom to people, who would you prefer, Spike Cohen or Dave Smith?
I prefer Spike Cohen. It's not really a diss to Dave Smith. Spike is just, I think, very good at explaining things to people. And I just maybe haven't watched enough of Dave Smith's content, but I just believe Spike's probably better at that. And Spike said this thing to me, and I think he said it before online and stuff, but he really wants to appeal to like the average suburban soccer mom, because if you can explain things to the average suburban soccer mom, they will go on Facebook and they will be very, very passionate about it. And you can just take over the country by explaining things to like the normiest of the normies. And I don't think Dave Smith appeals to the normies that much. And that's again, it's not any shade towards him. He's just a little bit more edgier, and his fan base is a little bit more edgier. I follow the guy. Like, again, it's not like me having a problem with him, but I do think that Spike is pretty valuable at engaging with the general populace, you know?
Yeah, I was at a libertarian meetup at the Beer Research Institute, and Jeremy Todd and myself were like very hard in the Dave Smith camp, and I think like every single other person there wanted Spike Cohen to run over Dave, and their main criticism was that Dave is not as sensitive to gay groups, transgender groups, or the African American issue, Black studies, this kind of thing. Not that the progressives are right about it; they're wrong about almost every aspect of it. But that Dave showed like no sympathy at all, whereas Spike does, and still thinks that he has a better approach to it. Do you see that at all, or did I just happen upon eight people, all of whom were wrong?
I've seen that criticism before, and I'm not saying that Dave Smith is a racist, a homophobe, whatever, but Spike does do a better job at communicating to those demographics. I understand Dave is probably not trying to do that, and a lot of people on the right, they'll say, oh, well, that's identity politics, without understanding that most demographics are not going to give up identity politics. You just have to appeal to that. So addressing issues that the Black community specifically has, addressing issues that the gay community specifically has, I don't think there's a negative to it, and I think it's actually necessary to win an election. And I honestly, when I met Spike, we didn't talk about any like racial or like gay issues or anything like that. So I don't think it's something that he puts at like the forefront of his personality, but he can talk about it and he can relate to people. He can go into the hood, he can go into urban communities and really, really relate. And I can tell that he's genuine when he does that.
What are some of the biggest things you learned from Hannah Cox?
So Hannah, as you probably know, is at FEE as well. She is one of my bosses. And before I worked at FEE, I really, really liked her on social media. I've been following her for well over a year, pretty sure probably like closer to 2 years. And I just thought she was really, really just a really strong, I hate to use like the cliche, but like a really strong, independent woman. Like she really just seemed like she knows what she was talking about. She produces her own content. She deals with the haters online. And we don't even agree on everything. I think she's more of a progressive libertarian than I am. But I just love seeing women in like a male-dominated political space like really succeed and really thrive and really not care what people think about them and really put their ideas out there, because my ideas maybe more controversial. I don't really know, but she generally has controversial ideas. It's just not popular for a younger woman to be a libertarian. So I really appreciate her for that. And then she had reached out to me several months back and asked me to apply for the Hazlitt Fellowship. So I did. And now we work pretty closely together. I've met her. I also met her at the Young Americans for Liberty event in Orlando too. So that was really nice.
What do you think are some of her best topics? I know that I scrolled through her FEE page some time ago. She wrote a nice little piece on every time Rand Paul has faced Fauci, but Paul has gotten the best of him. And it's like every 6 months, Paul and Fauci face off, and Rand is proven right like within a month. What do you think are some of her best things if I want to look more into her?
So we co-authored a really good article, I think, together about the racist history of gun control in America. And it was aimed to dispel this article from the ACLU saying that the Second Amendment is racist and that it appeals to like white supremacists, essentially, which was like, that was just stupid. I mean, it was kind of like a knockout article just because the premise was so like literally just so dumb. But she did a like really, really fantastic job like breaking it down, because I had wrote more about the history of gun control and how racist it actually was, but she went into like a further analysis about it. And I just thought like the way I'm really trying to get to where she is at her level of journalism. Like she just breaks down topics with so much ease, but so specifically. I think she's great at writing about it. So gun control is one of the issues where I would like to see more articles from her on.
And you had also mentioned that your grandfather was very inspirational to where you are now. What were some of your biggest influences, or some of the biggest takeaways you got from your grandfather?
So my grandfather is one of the most amazing people I know, and not just because he's my grandfather, but he's an Air Force veteran. He grew up during segregation. He's told me many stories about being being discriminated against, like when he tried to get lunch or on public transportation, when he's literally in his full dress, like Air Force uniform. And people don't really care. If you're Black, they didn't really see you as equal, even if you were actively serving your country. And so that really opened my eyes to race relations in this country, how hard it was, where we came from, and it really made me appreciate my grandfather's generation, just like so much more hearing about that kind of stuff. He later became a civil rights activist or advocate. He worked in, I believe it was DC government, working to provide like equal opportunities for public transportation for minorities here. So I just view him as very, very inspirational. And later he became an author. And it's funny because I'm pretty sure he votes Democrat, but we agree on like 90% of the issues. And I'm just like, you know what? All Black people are just gonna vote Democrat, and there's nothing I can do to change that. But we're still gonna have great conversations about politics, and he's still a huge inspiration to me. So yeah.
Very often, whenever politics is involved in something, it becomes totally corrupted, even if there are genuine, issues in a certain area. So people are ignorant, but the, government schools are, of course, not the answer. Terrorism exists, but the war on terror is evil and counterproductive. Of course, there's been terrible gay mistreatment historically, but, the LGBT Democratic Alliance is a complete fraud, all this terrible nonsense. If you are able to communicate any racial issues without, having the, million progressive lies that usually come along with it, what would you say is something important that people should know about the racial issue or any history with regard to America?
Yeah. So one of the things I'm most passionate about is the Second Amendment. Even though I'm like not a constitutionalist anymore because I think it's kind of useless, but I am a Second Amendment absolutist. I do think that gun control, or like any little bit of gun control, whether it be a bump stock ban or a semi-automatic weapon ban or open carry ban, I think that's all an infringement. And so that goes back to what I was telling you about the article that I wrote with Hannah Cox about the racist history of gun control. And I really enjoy talking about how existing gun control legislation we have today was originally written to disenfranchise Black people specifically, like how open carry is banned in California because Ronald Reagan didn't like that the Black Panthers were cop watching while open carrying in their neighborhoods. So I talk about that a lot, and I really emphasize this to conservatives and liberals because it appeals to them in different ways. Conservatives do not like gun control, but a lot of them will say, oh, well, racism isn't a problem anymore. It's not affecting people today. Systemic racism isn't real. And I reject that notion because there are systems of oppression like gun control. I think the abortion industry / Planned Parenthood is another one. I think the war on drugs is another one, that laws and policies and institutions were put into place to affect Black people disproportionately. And now today, it's true, they do affect everybody, but I do think they still affect urban and Black communities more so. So I do talk about that pretty frequently. And when I try to appeal to liberals, I'm like, hey, you guys hate racism, right? Well, here is a law that disproportionately affects Black people, and it's not about affirmative action or anything crazy. It's literally about our constitutional rights. So that's what I like to bring up often.
Do you have an elevator pitch? Let's talk about the left and the right. If you had like a quick elevator pitch for why someone who is a leftist, why they should embrace the freedom ideology, what would you say to them in a short amount of time?
I would say, let me think. I would say that freedom is the closest to equality you can get, because they always talk about equity, they always talk about equality, but I think that the only form of equality that is truly equal is the equality of opportunity. There is no equality of outcome. You can't have somebody over your head controlling the outcome. That's just not how anything works. If you look at history, that's not how it works. We already talked about Animal Farm, and the premise of that is oh, we have this great plan and everyone's going to be equal. Everyone's going to have a great time, except we're rich up here and you guys are all equally poor. And that's generally how it works. So I've definitely spoke to a few more liberal friends. I wouldn't say I've convinced hardcore leftists of this, just because I don't really have hardcore leftist friends, but my more liberal friends who are say stuff like, oh man, like I just hate the government, can't trust the government. I'm like, that is a great starting point. Let's talk about that more, because you are in favor of universal healthcare. So let's talk about how much you hate the government and why you wouldn't want them in your healthcare. So I usually talk about distrust of the government and equality of opportunity, as opposed to just overall equity.
And what would be your elevator pitch of freedom to someone on the right who is very comfortable with a large amount of government, whether they're a populist or a conservative?
I think it's a lot easier to appeal to the right, at least for me, just because I lean more right. Like I'm not a left libertarian at all. So a lot of people on the right, like I said, they're very anti-gun control. They really don't like the state messing with like the COVID lockdowns, masks, vaccine mandates, gun control. They just really, really hate that. And I'm just like, okay, just apply the same logic to a bunch of other stuff, because you may not like marijuana. I understand that. You may not like marijuana, but you can look at history and see how prohibition of alcohol turned out. And a lot of conservatives have no problem with alcohol, and even if they do have a personal problem with it, nobody is in favor of criminalizing it or throwing people in jail over it. So I just say, apply the same thing to like a million other subjects, and then you're there. Some conservatives are very comfortable and they know they have cognitive dissonance about it, and they know they're a little bit hypocritical about it, and they just don't care because they're stuck in their ways. I don't really spend a lot of time trying to appeal to those people, because they understand their status, they're educated on what that means, and they just don't care. But what I will do is talk to people who are kind of conservatarian, or maybe moderate Republican, and it's a lot of Trump supporters who I can actually appeal to, because Trump was like the outsider, like anti-establishment candidate, and I saw a lot of people who are pro-liberty voting for Trump and kind of infiltrating the Republican Party. So I feel like the time is kind of ripe to actually poach a bunch of Republicans and be like, hey, there's more freedom over here. You don't have to be in the GOP. But like I said before, we have people like Massey, we have people like Rand Paul. So I wouldn't say abandon the Republicans completely, but don't put all your eggs in one basket with them.
It's amazing how brazen the state just gets in its criminality. I don't know. Did you see yesterday on Twitter, there was a great clip going around. Rand Paul was asking Secretary Blinken, he goes, are you sure that the guy killed was a member of ISIS-K, or if he was an aid worker? And he says, we're actually reviewing that as we speak. So Rand Paul says, well, shouldn't you do that before the drone strike? The point is, it's amazing that they are able to get away with such terrible atrocities. And
They're
then,
so blatant,
and Michael Knowles is like, oh, well, the libertarians are against, civilization and order. It's like government's like the most destructive, disorderly group of criminals you could ever come across.
Yeah, it's funny because I don't even dislike Michael Knowles. I find it hard to dislike people just over political disagreements. I follow him. Some of his tweets I like, some of them. Most of them I don't like, but it's like whatever, But it's the tweets about it from more populist conservatives and Republicans being like, oh, libertarians ruin everything. I'm like, what have libertarians been in charge of? What did libertarians ruin? What are you talking about? Like, literally, what are you talking about? So, like, when he posts stuff like that, then I just have to laugh. Oh, libertarians are anti-civilization. Our civilization right now is killing innocent people. So whatever is not doing that, I'm with that. I don't know about y'all, but I'm not with 90% civilian deaths with drone strikes. I'm just not with that.
Yeah, self-ownership and private property. Mises was writing about being the root of civilization.
I don't know why people think that libertarians are anti-civilization. Even anarchists, which I'm not, I don't think that anarchists are anti-civilization. I genuinely don't believe that. I mean, there definitely are some people like that, but a lot of ANCAPs that I've talked to, they're just like, we want to live in communities. We don't want to be all alone. We want to have neighbors. We want to build coalitions. We want to do business with each other. We want to help each other, just without the state. But I think anarchy and liberty and libertarianism has such a negative connotation that people are like, oh my God, it's going to be chaos everywhere. People just want to loot and riot, and it's just going to be horrible. Like, that's not what it is, but I think that is like a very ultra conservative scare tactic that a lot of people use. Like, oh my God, the libertarian fantasy is going to be like, it's like the one meme that's like libertarians don't want to age of consent. I'm like, I don't know a single libertarian that believes that. People who are true libertarians believe that an adult taking advantage of a child violates the non-aggression principle. That's pretty much the basis of the non-aggression principle, is don't harm children. So I really don't understand it. But again, it's the fear tactics from people, like Michael Knowles, who, again, no shade, no tea, no hate, but is definitely uneducated, I think, on what libertarians actually believe.
They have so much nerve. I mean, it's bad enough, like AOC saying, tax the rich, increase government funding after the biggest, blunder in Afghanistan, which is the most favorable interpretation. But then when they say, that we don't care about the treatment of children, and all the kids murdered in these wars, all the kids separated from their parents because of, truancy legislation, all the kids who don't have opportunities because of the minimum wage laws, and we're like the anti-kid political ideology. It's so bizarre.
No, they'd rather fearmonger and be like, this is your kid on libertarianism, and it's like a kid just like smoking weed, like doing drugs and stuff.
Here's
like,
your kid on statism, a dead child.
Honestly,
from all
so
the sanctions.
I know so many libertarians that don't smoke weed, don't do drugs. They just want your freedom. They just don't want to see people in jail for it. But people act like we're all degenerates. I personally am a degenerate, but there's so many people who aren't that I just like I shouldn't represent the majority who are actually really nice, like upstanding gentlemen.
We have a few minutes left. How about the concept of religious people saying that, who just actually identify as religious, hardly, they tend to be Orthodox Christians, where they say religion is vitally important and libertarianism is atheism missing something big. I guess this would, be someone like Michael Knowles as well, where he explicitly, defends Catholicism and defends the state. Do you have any, words of wisdom or an elevator pitch for someone who is both a Christian and a statist?
So I used to be pretty hardcore Christian. I kind of went away from that as I got older, just because, I mean, as somebody who is like LGBT, it just like didn't really, it just didn't really mesh that well once I like kind of figured that out like in like middle school-ish. So I was like, yeah, I'm not gonna do this anymore. However, like I said before, I do see the merit in like believing in a higher power, believing in something bigger than yourself, finding a purpose that's not the state and not, serving some selfish interest. However, I just think if your religion is that good, you shouldn't need the threat of, a gun from the hand of the state to enforce it. So, gay marriage, for example, being illegal because a lot of religious people didn't like it. If your religion's that good, you wouldn't need the state to enforce it. You should just be able to bring people to God, or bring people to Jesus, or bring people to your religion just by being nice and just by talking to them and changing lives. And I this is no hate to Christians. I like Christians. I like the church I grew up in, to be honest. And Christians do a lot of charity, do a lot of donation, do a lot of mission trips. That is all great. And I think Christians are a good example of how people can help each other and be neighborly to each other without redistribution of wealth and taking a bunch of taxes and sending it to the Clinton Foundation or whatever like BS charity that they want us to donate to. So I actually do like religious people for that reason. So I just think we just need more of that and less of the state. And it's hard to appeal to people who are, again, like Michael Knowles, who understands, I don't think he's a stupid guy. I think he understands that he's a statist. So I wouldn't spend a lot of time like trying to convince somebody who is very religious and pretty somewhat authoritarian that, we shouldn't be enforcing this with the state, because they already know it's a little hypocritical and they're just cool with that. But to people who are just kind of like, regular Christians who may be like moderate Republicans, I would make the case that, hey, it's like, you may not be okay with your children smoking weed. That's totally acceptable. I completely see your point of view, but you wouldn't want somebody to be shot and killed over it. It's like the whole, it's like the Eric Garner situation, because he was selling, I think, loose cigarettes, right? And that's not a religious thing. A lot of religious people are against weed, but nobody really cares about loose cigarettes. And for me, I definitely saw a shift in people's thoughts about government bureaucracy and regulations, because a lot of people didn't even know that that was illegal. They're like, what, you can't sell a loose cigarette? Like, that's ridiculous. And so when I bring that up and be like, okay, well, drugs do kill people. I completely understand that drugs cause a lot of pain, a lot of hardship. Being addicted to something, that's a horrible thing. But the state has completely mismanaged the treatment of this, and it just shouldn't be happening. People shouldn't be being killed over it at the hands of the state. And so I just apply it to a lot of different issues that religious people get their panties in a bunch about. The one thing that I don't know how to talk to people about is abortion, because I definitely lean more pro-life, and a lot of libertarians don't. So I really don't know how to talk about it. It's not even an issue I talk about very often, just because it's so polarizing, you know?
Yeah, as far as communicating to, the Catholics or Christians, I always like to just plant the seed of, if human beings are the result of God's intentional creation, and thou shalt not murder and thou shalt not steal, a couple non-aggression principles in the Ten Commandments, well, isn't it almost the ultimate crime to initiate violence against God's creation? Isn't that a bit of a slap in the face to this all-knowing, omniscient deity? And saying it with all that respect, I know that it plants a seed. I've gotten multiple emails from people who have said, that's how I was really able to align them, because they always feel like we're saying, ditch this thing you love and come to us instead, when all you have to do is, it's like an add-on where you just don't believe the state should rule over Christians or anyone else. That's what the state is. They're trying to be the supreme authority. They're trying to be God on earth. They write words down on paper, and if you don't abide by their commandments, they cage you and shoot you if you resist. That's them trying to be God on earth.
That's a good
over
point.
Christians.
I mean, that would convince me. If I was more well-versed in Christian theology, I'd probably be able to make a better argument and be like, hey, this is in the Bible, and that we shouldn't do this and that, and the government is actually doing this, that, and that. So you actually put it in a really good, simple way. I just haven't been religious in, like, I don't know, since I was like in middle school. So
Well, I want to thank everyone for watching the Libertarian Institute and Keith Knight Don't Tread on Anyone. Links to Olivia's Linktree and Twitter, YouTube will be in the description below. Olivia, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
thank you so much for having me.